connected? We're good.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. My name is Greg. I'll be the MC for the last section here. And today we've got Tracy, who's from Pluto, a ZK dev tooling team, and he's going to talk about a very interesting talk today about signal versus noise. And I'll let him take it from here.
All right. Hello, hello. Can you hear me all right? A little bit closer. All right. That looks good. Hi, everyone. So I'm Tracy. Like he said, I'm the founder of a company called Pluto. And we're building a dev platform for applications to add cryptography, which we think brings novel features to those applications. Today I'm going to talk about this idea that's been on my mind for a few months now, which I call signal versus noise. And really the problem is, in the last 5 years, we've seen a rise of LLMs and generative AI that can produce content that's more or less indistinguishable from human content. And I'm going to talk about the solutions that exist today and possibly some ways that cryptography can help with that. And this really started as an exploration into identity and fraud more than anything. But the deeper I dug, the more I thought about misinformation and how important that is to solve as well. Okay, so first off, I'm going to go through a few examples that are kind of coming up recently. So first is real ID, fake ID. Today's KYC and identity solutions like Stripe, Jumio, Persona, they're built on the notion of a valid identity. And generative models have reached a point of quality that they can construct those IDs that are really difficult to tell from a real identity. So this is actually an LLM, or like a generative AI model identity. And it was used to bypass some OKX identity KYC. So there are still safeguards. So for example, this has on it like an issuance ID, and you can actually check with a central authority like LexisNexis to ensure that the ID was issued by a government organization. But if you mix this fake ID with like a valid serial ID, you can actually bypass those checks as well. So this is a challenge. Next is real person, fake person. So text generated from an LLM at this point is just indistinguishable from human text. And that's also becoming true of voice and video. And the cost and sophistication to create these fake people is decreasing. And then finally, real media, fake media. So like I was saying, generative AI produces increasingly realistic video, audio, images, and we can no longer trust our human sense to help us determine the truth. So imagine this scenario. You're watching a video on YouTube, and you think to yourself, damn, that can't be real. Like, how would Donald Trump say that? And then you attempt to investigate. You Google, like, did Donald Trump say this? Ultimately, despite your best efforts, you literally cannot tell whether it was real or not, and you give up and you kind of move on with this weird sense like, I don't know the truth here anymore. I'm curious how many of you have had this experience already? Yeah, that's nearly everybody. So just broad strokes, like what is the landscape? There's three big problems. It's fraud, spam, and misinformation. Fraud is typically financially related, so that's about KYC and KYB, and those are the techniques that we use today and the regulations associated with them. Spam is about creating fake accounts and using them to misuse a platform. And misinformation is about spreading information that is difficult to distinguish from real information. Okay, so what solutions do we have for fraud today? Like I said earlier, we have Stripe Identity, Persona, Plaid, LexisNexis, and they're very sophisticated platforms. It's not that they haven't given it a good go. Each of these platforms employs many, many techniques. So today they'll use things like deep neural networks based on videos of a user holding up their license. And the actual goal of that interaction is not just to capture the license text. They're actually monitoring to see the reflection and the sheen on the license, the person picking it up and putting it in front of the camera. All of that information is collected, and it's part of determining that it's a real ID. They also use biometric data, so often if they're asking for a webcam, they're actually looking at your eyeballs as well to try and see if you're a real person. You're looking around the room. They monitor how your mouse moves around a website. They check that parsed identity against a central database. They use really adaptive ML techniques, so emerging threats are kind of constantly happening in this space. It's a game of cat and mouse. And when a new technique comes up, often it's so hard to respond for these companies they'll just like write a hard rule. Like, okay, we see a new technique, it's coming out of Slovakia. It's like breaking through our checks here. Like, let's just ban everybody in Slovakia for the next like week until we can figure out a better way to fix this problem. And they build those into like a programmable decision-making framework. What about spam and misinformation? So a few solutions exist for spam, and we've seen this on Twitter. That's like account gating, paying $8 to get a single account, or civil resistance mechanisms like captcha, and also content moderation, like the infamous horrible job that a lot of Facebook people have sitting around and looking at terrible content. And then on misinformation, there are things like community notes. So having the community try to digest information and determine if it's real, Google fact check, and a coalition for content provenance, which is an attempt by like content creation tools to create a chain of trust from where you created a video to your eventual distribution of it. Cool. And then briefly, the regulation landscape. So there are global regulations in every country that try to put a framework in place for these problems. Here's a list of them. I'm not going to go too deep on regulation, but it'll be in the slides if anyone's curious to look. Okay, so really, I'm posing the question, like, is there a problem? Is this problem solved, or is it an open problem still? And my case is essentially like fraud prevention is pretty robust today. But despite that, the rate of fraud continues to increase. So platforms already have a really strong economic incentive to get this right. There's multiple billion-dollar companies trying to solve it. And the costs are sort of directly measurable. When the fraud rate increases, the revenue decreases. So that one, I think we're doing an okay job, but it is getting more challenging. And then on spam and misinformation, I think this is where there's really an opportunity to do a better job. So historically, misinformation is focused on text. As I said, generative AI makes highly sophisticated audio and video misinformation possible. And today's solutions are really built platform by platform only by the largest organizations in traditional internet, Google, Facebook, et cetera. They essentially have teams viewing this content, trying to train models to predict whether it's good or bad information. And information is highly subjective, so it's very difficult to determine a sense of ground truth. Furthermore, because they're so specific to a given platform, like say Facebook, they're highly centralized, and it's very difficult if you're a small blog to use this type of solution and have the similar quality of content moderation as Facebook might. And so I propose a few things that are missing from what's out there today. First is anonymity preserving tools for fraud. So today's fraud prevention requires you to reveal who you are. And that involves revealing your PII data to some central authority. I think we're probably going to enter an era of the internet where almost everybody who uses it has to be KYC'd to avoid the spam that's going to arise from AI. The downside of that is it's a very dystopian world to imagine that all internet activity is KYC'd. So I think we need anonymous preserving tools that allow you to use your identity to prove you're a human, but also give you privacy and anonymity. I also think we need universal tools and platforms for misinformation. So as I said, there's no universal truth on information. It's subjective. So each platform has to make judgment decisions, but I think every platform needs access to a tool for making those decisions. And then I also think we need a general solution for spam, but it's almost impossible. Spam and not spam is another subjective challenge. Spam's only detectable when it becomes abuse. The first message from a user might not be spam, but the second might. Okay, so what are some emerging techniques? Like, this is all valid pain points, but we haven't really talked about any solutions. So for those of you who are in crypto, there's quite a few that are up and coming. So one is proof of humanity. This is WorldCoin, sort of scan your eyeballs, determine that you're a real human, give you an identity, and then let you link it into a platform. There are challenges here. There's black markets for identities. People in third world countries may not mind selling their retina scan for $3 or $5. And there's also privacy concerns. Excuse me. We're trusting WorldCoin a lot to use that information and protect it. And despite their best efforts, you may have a security leak. And in the event of some exploit in their stack, extremely sensitive personal information can end up on the internet and never be put back in the box. So I think it's a legitimate concern. I don't know if those of you have paid attention to the DNA processing 23andMe. They recently had a scandal where they were selling like DNA sequences to third parties, which is kind of like permanently revealing information about you to the state or whoever's buying that information. Next possible techniques and solutions are signed identity documents. So I don't know if everyone knows this, but inside your passport is an NFC chip. And on your NFC chip is a signed attestation from the government, private key, about your information. So this can actually be a really powerful source of identity verification. You could tap your passport on your phone, extract that signed information, and have a pretty robust source of identity. And then the final is just composable attestations and reputation. So if you can take these attestations from a few sources, proof of humanity, a tapped passport, maybe some personal information about where you live, your tax returns, etc., you can compose these things together and maybe layer on some social reputation. You might be able to make a pretty robust artifact about your individuality and your proof of humanity. And then on misinformation, some emerging techniques. So one is attested sensors. That's microphones, cameras, location data. You can actually, in the hardware of the device, create a signed production of content and use that signature to verify that it came from a trusted public key. So influential figures are probably going to start publishing most of their content from signed devices only. And recently we saw the White House announce they'll start doing this in 2024. That helps, but it doesn't actually solve the whole problem. A big part of content production is the initial production, but then the editing and modification of that content. So we've also seen a few cool hacks around verifiable modification of content, cropping, resizing images, while maintaining proof of provenance. So checking inside of a ZK snark that it came from a signed source, transforming it inside of a snark, and then producing a proof that it was transformed correctly and it was the signed data that was input. There was a cool hackathon project at Stanford Hackathon for this. And another one is this cool idea called perceptual hashing, which is taking an audio, or not necessarily audio, a video or photo, and hashing it to check the similarity to a prior video or photo before cropping, screenshotting, or modification. There's a paper from Apple called Neural Hash, and it offers relatively robust hashing across transformations. So you might take an initial image, screenshot a piece, take it out, and then compare the prior and the latter perceptual hash and get like a 90+% positive ratio, which can help to detect that the content derived from a valid source. And there's actually a team, Morpheus Labs, who just did some work on this a few days ago. Cool. How do these all help? So really, if you think about it, like I said at the beginning, the goal is to only have 8 billion human actors on the internet, at least in a setting where other people are consuming that content. It would be great if you could sort of binary know it's coming from a human that's a valid source. And if you could, from these actors, derive a fair reputation score, you may be able to remove some of the noise from the internet. It's also important, like I was saying, that the classification is robust and forgiving. If we have one person online and somehow they get misclassified, it's like taking away a fundamental human right. So there needs to be some path for remediation from that situation. And then from this set of actors, you can sort of classify strong versus weak information. So I took a photo from my attested sensor, I have my identity linked to this attested sensor, and I can prove it's strong information from me. And weaker information like deriving perceptual hashes to show that I had the content, I modified it, maybe put it in a meme, and then put it on a website. And the ultimate challenge really is to do this while preserving anonymity, privacy, and freedom. If we build these systems and they don't have hard cryptography at the core of them, it ends up being a pretty dystopian internet that I don't think any of us want to use. So individual freedom needs to be protected for this to actually work. And then maybe I'll spare one thought for the AIs, which is I think that AI-generated content in general will be an important part of the internet. I'm not saying we should ban all AI-generated content. It's just a question of being able to differentiate the two and know the provenance of some content. And then finally, can blockchains help with this? I think the answer is yes. I think blockchains serve as a great shared protocol source. So as I talked about before, Facebook has their own platform for doing this problem, but it's very hard if you're an individual content creator to use that platform. If we could have a shared protocol for identity, reputation, content provenance, and we could use that as a source of truth, I think it would be a better tool in general than one centralized system for this. Cool. So the path forward is 3 problems. Solve the Sybil problem, build a chain of trust from content creation to distribution, and create shared protocols for information and user quality. And that's that. How we're thinking at Pluto. Today we're building tools for the internet and developers. We want to keep the internet weird, but keep it useful. And we're building trustworthy techniques for merging the internet and blockchains and using advanced cryptography to create a transferable chain of trust. All right, questions? I see one hand up. Do we have microphones?
First, I want to say I really love this. I mean, I think this is super important stuff to think about. As far as like the composable stuff, I love that too. Have you thought about, everybody, we're in the decentralized world, right? So it's like one guy can't be the center of trust for the whole world. Have you thought a little bit about how to interoperate between different like centers of trust?
Yeah, I have. I think a big part of what I describe as composability is using programmable cryptography to verify an attestation from some arbitrary source and kind of like Boolean and it together with attestations from other sources. In the beginning, you could imagine a heuristic model. So you have like if conditions, if this, then that, if this, then that. But you could also get to a richer model where maybe you're doing a binary classification with a ML-based estimator. And you can also verify that inside of a snark. So. Oh, there's one more.
Testing. There we go.
Hi there.
Hello. Thanks for a great talk. Super interesting. I was wondering if you talked about almost like putting a watermark on content.
Could you speak a little louder? I can't quite hear you.
Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. You were talking about putting almost like a watermark on some content if it comes from the White House or something like that, so that people can see that that came from them.
Yeah.
But there's no watermark on any AI-generated content, so there's no proof of the provenance for that.
Yeah.
Would another alternative be somehow regulating the AI-generated content to have provenance on-chain so that you can see where that content originated from in the first place?
I see. So one, I'm not a fan of trying to regulate things. I think it's even if you tried to make it the case that you had provenance for any AI-generated content from like one fixed source, someone could just spin up an open source model and start generating content. So it's very difficult to have guaranteed provenance of content. I think the best we can do is have signatures and attestations to what we know is good, valid content from good, valid sources, and the rest we essentially have to consider noise. And then you have to opt into how much of that noise you want to experience. So for like White House content, yeah, I think it's about signing the content, and any user who ultimately consumes that content being able to look at the signature, verify it themselves, and see that it actually came from the White House, having like a little check mark next to it. And then if users want to edit that content, maybe like remix it into a news feed or something, I think it's about having segments of that video that can be verified as derived from an original attestation. And that's kind of where perceptual hashes, I think, come into this.
Hello. What incentive do you see for centralized parties and commercial parties to use decentralized solutions for provenance and other things? Is it legal? Is it commercial? Something else?
I see. Yeah, so I don't think there's an incentive for a central organization who's already doing KYC or identity checks. I think they'll continue to use centralized technology. But I could imagine a world where platforms that value anonymity find these solutions the most appealing to avoid having to KYC and manage that type of identity information. So I think Twitter or Reddit, where like famously anonymous profiles are a key part of their social strategy, would like to find decentralized solutions to this. That's my hunch. Okay, that's time. Thank you everyone for coming. I'll be around for a few minutes if you want to ask questions.